you. And this morning, I want to start off by asking you to make sure you've got something to jot down a couple of notes with. And I want to start by asking you to rate your current level of stress. Use a scale of 1 to 10. Think about everything happening. This is a really chaotic time for the world that we're living in. We have COVID, which we thought was going away, but now seems to be back with a rampage. We've got the entire political spectrum, and we certainly don't have enough time to talk about that, especially not on this show. We also have the holidays upon us, which can bring about their own level of stress in a normal year, but this year is even more stressful. We have those who are not able to be with their families, loved ones are really crying out to connect with each other in the way that they used to. And so there's a lot happening in our world. So I want you to think about all of that happening for you and just rate your current level of stress. And we're going to talk today about living, loving, and leading stress free. Now, my latest ebook is on this topic, and it's called The Stress Free Leader. If you have an opportunity, I invite you to download it at stressfreeleader.com. Stressfreeleader.com. If you don't get that now, don't worry about it. I'll repeat it again at the end of our conversation. So, as we think about what's happening around us, I want to share with you some interesting statistics about stress. Most of us look at stress as just this, well, something that I need to deal with. I put my head down, I move on, and I just get it done. However, 75% of leaders say that the primary source of stress in their life is work. And 45% of entrepreneurs call themselves stressed. US businesses lose up to 300 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars yearly as a result of workplace stress. 43% of employees believe that their employers care about their work-life balance. And we spend $200 million a year in medications that are related to stress. And finally, some estimate that nearly 66% of all primary care physician visits have something to do with stress. Now, as I think about those numbers, they're pretty startling. And then I go back to who we are and the way that we process and live our lives, and how many of us are overlooking the real impact stress has in our lives. So, what is stress? Stress is really the body's physiological response to stress or tension. It can be any challenge or demand. So, you can't really avoid stress. It's an autonomic response that happens in our bodies. And of course, it started way back in the days where we needed to use the flight or a fight response. And what happens is there's an entire chemical process that takes place when your body uh, realizes that there's some sort of a stressor or a tension or a challenge that it needs to deal with. So we won't get into all of the details about that, but just know that it is a physiological response. And we know that there are different types of stress around us. So we have external stressors and we have internal stressors. So I want to talk for a moment about external stressors. When I'm thinking about an entrepreneur, and often in my coaching conversations, as I'm talking to entrepreneurs, they are really stressed. And it's either in the phase of that startup phase where they're really trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together to get their business moving, or it's in the growth phase where their business has been going for a while, but it's time to move to the next level and things are just not happening at the pace and the rate that they would like for it to. So that tends to cause some stress. When you shift to the workplace stressor, many times folks are unhappy about their jobs. They may find that they're working too much. People are often frustrated about their chances for advancement. Um, in today's world, when we have all of these things happening around us, many times you have long work hours, you have heavy workloads, and you have management that often contributes to the stress that we feel, especially in the workplace. Just because you have the title of manager or leader doesn't mean that you are executing those skills in a way that minimize stress. So, those are some of the workplace and business types of external stressors. But guess what? There are also external stressors that are family related. And I just mentioned one of them earlier, the holidays. Right? The holidays brings about its own unique blend of stress. I cannot tell you how many folks I talk to, and I'm sure that you have the same experience where you talk to folks who are stressed out about getting the gifts, getting the house decorated, preparing the meals, who's coming over, getting the cleaning done, right? Holidays can be very stressful. In addition to those stressors, you also have maybe you're dealing with relationship challenges, divorce, loss of finances. Getting married is also a stressor. So you see, stressors are not just negative. You could be in the process of building your dream home. That is also a type of stress. And as a result, your body is going to respond and react to it just as it would any other stress. We may be dealing with traumatic events. So I want you to just think about the different stressors in your life. So, just as you jotted down your current level of stress, what external stressors are present in your life? Where's the stress coming from? So, if you said that you are stressed, maybe it's a 7 or an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10 right now, where's that stress coming from? So, as I mentioned, there are external stressors, and those external stressors are triggered by some external stimuli or event. But there are also internal stressors, and internal stressors are self imposed stressors. Now, you might say to yourself, why in the world would I bring about self imposed stress? Well, we do it all the time, right? We find ourselves fearful, we find ourselves getting frustrated. We find ourselves getting stressful or upset. Uh, we have feelings of uncertainty, right? And ruminating and going over these things that we're fearful about or what we're worrying about over and over again is a type of internal stress. And so, what does your body do? It responds to it just like it does any other stress. So, we have to be mindful of those. So, the next question for you is, where is your internal stress coming from? Is it frustration? Is it fear? Is it all of the changes that we're experiencing in our world? Might you have unrealistic expectations, not only of yourself, but of others? All of these are types of internal stressors. So, as I mentioned, when we put stress in its various places, we know that there is sort of the external stress and there's the internal stress. But there's also good stress and there's bad stress. As I mentioned, you might be getting married, be super excited about that. You might be building a home, you might be getting a new job or a promotion. Very, very exciting, but stressors nonetheless. And we call those eustress. Those are called eustress. But the type of stress that often shows up for us that we want to manage and minimize is what we call distress, right? The distress is the negative stress that shows up in our lives. When we're talking about these types of distress that show up for us, it's not the short term acute stress that is really the problem. Yes, that triggers the same type of response in you, but it's the longer term chronic stress. I want you to answer this for yourself. The stressors that you identify as having being present in your life, how long have they been there? How long have you been dealing with these stressors, particularly family stressors, work stressors? We tend to carry these with us, almost like we're packing for a trip or a vacation, right? These stressors are present and we're lugging them around with us, simply trying to deal with them. But these chronic stressors have a pretty significant effect on us, and they affect us in different ways. There's the physical effects, there's the emotional and mental effects. When we're talking about the physical stressors, earlier I mentioned that stress is your body's response to tension or a challenge. And there's an entire chemical process that takes place when your body realizes that dealing with some sort of a challenge or tension. And the hormones, the corticosteroids, the neoepinephrine, all of these that wash through your system without you having any control over it. It simply happens when the body determines that there's a stress present. Now, if you can manage that stress, if it's a short-term stress, then those effects are minimum, right? And you don't have the cumulative effect. But what happens when we have that suitcase full of stressors that we carry around and we've been carrying it around for a long time? Those chemicals, they go immediate, their initial reason for being is to help us, right? If you're in a flight or a fight situation, you need those hormones so that you can power your legs, you decrease your immune system, so that you can focus on your immediate need to respond. But what happens when that goes on, or it happens over and over? All of a sudden, those very same chemicals that were released in order to help you are now hurting you. And how do they show up? They show up physically, where you might be having some GI distress. You might find yourself having some sleepless nights. Maybe now you're noticing that you're coming down with more colds and your immune system is depressed now for a longer period because of the response. You might find that you have blood pressure challenges, body aches, headaches, right? These are the physical symptoms that show up for us. And the question for you is, are you listening? Are you listening to what your body's telling you? It sometimes speaks very softly, but it speaks nonetheless. It also shows up for us on an emotional level. We sometimes find ourselves dealing with depression, anxiety, irritability, lack of focus, right? So these are the ways that we respond emotionally. My fear and what I coach to is that sometimes we carry this stress so long that we don't even realize that we're stressed. Therefore, we ignore the signs and the symptoms that are being presented to us. Even signs like maybe having a low sex drive or not performing the way, yes, that too can result as a result of different stressors in your life. So I want you to pay attention. So the question for you now is, what effects of stress are you seeing in your life? Are you having those sleepless nights, blood pressure issues, GI upset, anxiety, irritability? And it could be a whole host of other symptoms. I could probably go on for the entire show talking about the effects of stress. But just for you, be mindful, pay attention, and think about how this stress is showing up in your life. So, the question for you is, how do you respond when these stressors show up in your life? Because it manifests itself somehow. All of us, when we are under high amounts of stress, it shows up for us. So, I'm going to talk to you right now about 5 different ways that stress often shows up in your life. And I call it SADD. SADD. SAD. Right. So the 5 types of ways stress often shows up are: number one, in how you begin to show up externally, how you begin to process. And it's often one of these ways: we become scattered, we become angry or aggressive, we become disagreeable, we fall into the realm of denial, or we become deflated. Those are the 5 types of ways that stress shows up in your life. And those are the 5 types that I address in my latest ebook, The Stress Free Leader. Let's quickly run through these, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of a roadmap for what you can do when stress begins to show up for you. The first way that stress shows up is sometimes we become scattered. Now, when we're in the middle of, excitement, and at first it feels really good when you have that burst of energy, right? Remember, the the response of the body is to wash you in a range of, different chemicals. And so at first, the chemical response is positive, right? So you might feel a burst of energy, you might get some extra focus, but over time, it begins to wear off and it shifts to the opposite. We might get scattered. And so now all of the can do attitude that we had is now turning against us. We become unfocused, we're easily distracted. The whole butterfly effect is in true, full form. We begin to make hasty decisions, right? We become really inefficient with what we're doing and how we're doing it. This is one way that stress can show up in our lives. It's that place where you become scattered and you'll feel it. So, as we go through the five types and the five ways that stress shows up, I want you to just think about, do you identify with each one? Or which one is predominant for you? We tend to have habits and patterns. On the show, we talk a lot about the role that habits play in our life. And so we have habits when it comes to stress as well. So most of us will have either a combination of these different types show up, or we'll have one predominant style that tends to come to us more easily than the others. So the first one we talked about was scattered. Often, if you are in that place of feeling high stress and overwhelmed, some of us can become angry, irritable, or aggressive, right? Those of us that sort of classify ourselves, or others may classify us as high strung, often fall into this category. They're used to working at a fast pace. However, when things aren't going well, they become very irritated. They really struggle to keep up with their specific way of being or their specific standard that they've set for themselves and others. And as a result, they do things like they become controlling, or they suddenly are not so tactful, right? Now they're at a stage where instead of being mindful of how their words will land on others, they become not so tactful and they want to keep it 100, right? They just want to tell it like it is. They might be slow to apologize. So these are some things that might show up if you are in that place where when you are stressed, you become angry or aggressive. The next way it shows up, and again, this may not be, all of these may not show up for you, but one of these might resonate with you. This third type is disagreeable. Now, I want you to just think for a moment about someone that you know that when they get in, quote, the mood, they become very disagreeable and they become the naysayer that you would just as soon not talk to for the next couple of weeks. We all know that person. Don't name them, right? They shall remain nameless. But we know who that person is, that when they get in that disagreeable space, when they are stressed, they may be fine under normal circumstances, but stress tends to bring out something in them that is not the best. When they are in that disagreeable state, they tend to become focused on themselves. Right. All of a sudden, no one else really matters. They're really, they become protectionist, right? They're focused on themselves. They may be slow to adapt or accept change. And in this world we're living in right now, flexibility is going to be the name of the game, right? They may focus on all of the problems instead of focusing on the solutions where we can begin to move forward. So that's the third type. And that person is in that state of being disagreeable. The fourth type is the person who simply goes into denial. And typically, I recognize this person in denial because I may be aware that there is a lot happening for them, right? Things are just a little bit off the rails. But when you ask this person how they are, the response is likely, I'm fine. Yeah, everything's good. This might be the person that is in that stage of denial. It's a form of protectionism, right? It's a form of them just not being sure how to cope, or not coping in a way that can be seen. Now, we all have our different styles and ways of coping. The other thing I want to say about these different styles is none of them are wrong. If this is how you are when you're under high stress, it is what it is. What's more important is to be able to recognize it and ask yourself this question: is it serving you? Is it serving you well? And if you feel well served by it, then no one else should be stepping in and saying that it's not serving you. This is about you. And how do you get more of what you want and less of what you don't? So, in this one, type 4 is the denial. This person is oftentimes they wear a cape. You know it as the Superman or Superwoman syndrome. Da da da, I can take care of it all, right? I can do it. It's okay. Knowing full well that you already have way too much on your plate. So, why are they taking on more? Well, sometimes there's a little bit of martyr syndrome going on as well, right? Well, I'm the one, I always need to do it. It's always me. So, I'll step up and, of course, I'll take care of it, right? This is the person who may not really realize that it's okay to step away. It's okay to take some time. It's okay to say no, right? If you've got a ton on your plate, there's nothing wrong with saying no. But often, this person won't want to upset other people or want people to think less of them or think they're not a team player, think they're not carrying their weight. So they continue to take on more. Now, the fifth and final type, and the way that this might show up for you, is there is often times when you might get stressed and you just may become deflated. All of the high hopes and goals and expectations you have, all of a sudden, they go right out the window. And now your mindset is, you know what? Forget it. This is just how it is. It's not going to change. It's always going to be this way. And so, what happens when you're there? You become disengaged. You just get that here we go again mindset. You get a little bit cynical. You just go through the motions. And again, the question is it serving you well? So, knowing that those are the different ways that it can show up for you, what can you do? So, a couple of things I've asked you to do so far. Number one, I asked you to rate your stress level on a scale of 1 to 10. The second thing I asked was, what internal sources of stress are present for you in your life right now? And what external stressors are present for you right now. So, both to think about internally and externally based on what we've discussed. How are those showing up for you right now? Now, the fourth thing that I've asked you to do is to identify with one of the types of ways that stress manifests in your life. It shows up somehow. As much as we try to pretend that it's not there, we pretend we want to push it away, it will show up for you. How is it showing up for you? And is there a physical component to that? Right? Are you having the sleepless nights or you finding yourself irritable? So, where are those ways that it's showing up for you? So, now what can you do about it? Wherever you are, whatever level stress you have, because again, stress is real, it's positive and negative. So, I want to introduce you to what I call 5 C's to stress free. 5 C's to stress free. And this is your roadmap. So when you find yourself in that place of stress, when you find that, you know what, I have a headache every single day. I'll tell you a quick story. I was working at one organization years ago, and I had worked there for years. And I went to work every day, and it was never a problem. Something triggered where every time I got to work and it was time to clock in, I would get a headache. Now, I am that person that will try to push it away and just power on and soldier on. That is totally me. And so it took me a while to realize the connection with what was happening. I knew I had a headache, but I wasn't connecting the dots that, oh my goodness, I'm fine when I'm driving in, the sun is shining, I feel good. I get to work and I have a headache. That was a sign. That was a signal for me. And it was time for me to do something different. So let me tell you and introduce you to the 5 C's to stress free. The first C is clarity. The second C is confidence. The third C is choice. The fourth C is communication. And the fifth C is consistency. So let's talk through those quickly before we wrap up. Clarity. Brian Tracy has a quote that says, clarity accounts for probably 80% of your success and happiness. 80%. I talk about clarity in every single thing that I do. Every client that I coach, every organization that I talk to, I start with clarity. Because when you lack clarity, to me, it signals some sort of a conflict, and it's often an internal conflict. It may be a conflict between what's expected of you and what you want, what you believe and what you don't, what others are saying versus what you want to do, right? There's some sort of a conflict that you have to resolve. And the way that you do that is through clarity. So sit down. And when you are dealing with any one of those sorts of, whether it's an external stressor or one of the internal stressors, go through this process with first getting clear. What is this stress about? What am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? What do I want and need to happen from this situation? Put into perspective what others might be wanting and expecting of you as well. That's a really important point because you want to be aware that the expectations that others have of you might be that source of stress. But at the end of the day, and Karen knows this, what do I always say? Hashtag, it's always you. Hashtag, it always comes back to you. When I went through my divorce years ago, I was dealing with a lot of internal conflict. There was, well, what should I do for the family? What's expected of me just in general in society? What have I presented to the world about who I am and my marriage? And then what's inside of me? I had to resolve that conflict. I had to get clear on who I was at that moment and what I needed to move forward. That brought me the ability to be confident and comfortable saying, you know what? I need to go in a different direction. But I couldn't make that decision until I got clear. Now, the second C is confidence. And I love this quote by Eleanor Roosevelt. She said, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. So, who are you giving consent to make you feel inferior? Do you have the courage of your convictions? If you know who you are and you know what you want, you know what works and doesn't work for you, then do you have the confidence to step up, to go for it with everything you have to make it happen? Confidence. I find confidence to be a subtle factor in most of my individual coaching situations. There is someone who knows what they want and what they want to do, but they haven't quite garnered the confidence in order to step up and make it happen. In my second book, The Dream Life Roadmap, I wrote an entire chapter on confidence, and it talked about confidence as an internal renewable resource. And it gave strategies on how you can boost the confidence. I don't have time to go into the details on that because I want to stay focused here. But in this second C, know that you have to build that confidence. For me, when I first started public speaking, it was a real challenge because I am an introvert at heart and I am a hermit. I'll be right up front with that. I am just fine in my little cubby hole all by myself. But I was in a situation where I had to start speaking publicly and I had to work on building my confidence. Where do you need to build confidence? Because without it, you will not be able to manage and minimize the stressors you're facing. Now, the third C is choice. This is critical. What's the definition of insanity? Continuing to do the same thing and expecting different results. Are you expecting the stressors to just magically disappear on their own? My view is if you want something to change, you need to do something. You need to be the one to step up. It won't magically disappear. And this goes especially for those of you that are carrying stressors like long term family stressors, relationship stressors, job stressors. What's going to change about that situation? You will need to be the one to step up and change it. Many times this time of year, we're dealing with stressors. And I'll tell you, for years, over Thanksgiving, I love Thanksgiving. I loved being in the family, and someone has an open mic if you want to mute. I love Thanksgiving. I love being around family. But guess what? It was stressful. How many of you can relate to the all night Thanksgiving dinner? You know what? That was stressful. And while the next day, while everyone is having a great time and enjoying the meal, I was exhausted. I was like, oh my goodness, yeah, y'all enjoy that, but I'm ready to take a nap. And so what did I do? I had to change something. And I now have a routine that allows me to have a much less stress Thanksgiving meal. So, if you want this to change, if you want the stressors in your life to change, you have to make choices and you have to decide what you're willing to do differently. Now, the fourth C is communication. And I love this quote by Anthony Robbins. He says, the way we communicate with others and ourselves ultimately determines the quality of our lives. How powerful is that? The way we communicate with others and ourselves ultimately determines the quality of our lives. Now, we know Tony Robbins is this big guru now, and it might seem easy for him, but this goes for you as well, right? So while it might seem easy for him, there are things that we can bring into our own lives in terms of communication. Those of you that know me know I talk about communication in two ways: internal and external communication. I want to talk about internal communication for a moment because we know we talk about it all the time. Thoughts are things. Thoughts are things. They are spiritual in nature, and the thoughts you think and the words you speak show up in your reality. We also talk about the fact that the conscious mind is the gatekeeper, and that is the one that you have control over. And your subconscious mind will accept as reality anything that you pass forward. So, if thoughts are things, it tells you the importance of your internal communication. And then you need to manifest that in your external communication as well. So if you've got the confidence, if you got the clarity, you have the confidence, you're now making different choices. You now understand that you need to communicate those choices that you're making in a way that builds relationships and gets you more of what you want and less of what you don't. Communicate your way out of stress. Say no, back away, change your routine, do something differently, and speak and let others know that this is a new day. There's a new sheriff in town, and the way that it was is not the way that it is now. That's not mean, rude, or ugly. It's just a fact of where I am. Be confident and communicate that. And then the final C is consistency. So once you decide the 5 C's that are going to get you to living, loving, and leading stress free, now are you willing to be consistent? Are you committed to the change? Hashtag it's always you. It starts with you and it ends with you. If you don't step up and choose to do something differently, it will not be different. You can't eliminate all the stressors. That's not the goal. The goal is better management to get to that place where you can recognize a stressor and then confidently navigate it so that it doesn't weigh you down, so that it doesn't pull you, so that it's not working against you and that it's working for you. In order for your stress to be different, you must be different. Because you see, a wish without a plan is just a fantasy. Hope alone is not a strategy. So you need to step up and be committed. Now, having a full understanding of all of that, and I know that was a lot of information, but I wanted to walk you through all the different pieces. Now, having done that, you can go back and adjust your stress rating if you didn't take into account your internal stressors and your external stressors, the building of the business, the work demands, the family stressors. If you didn't take all those into account, go back and reevaluate what is your stress rating on a scale of 1 to 10. And then, as you consider the different sources of stress that you identify, begin to apply the 5 C's. Your goal is to get more of what you want and less of what you don't. And the way that you do that is by managing your stress. Now, I want to pull in one final thought for you to consider. As you go through all of this, we talk about it here regularly. As you go through this process, remember the universal laws. They work all the time, on time, every time. You want to be focused on the law of consciousness, which governs your thoughts, the law of attraction, which brings you more of what you are putting out, and the law of clarity that really allows you to see the path ahead of you. Imagine, imagine a world and your life where you are able to confidently navigate any stressor that's coming your way. Imagine having the tool set, skill set, and mindset to be able to work through whatever's in front of you and put yourself in the best position to be success. How would that feel? Stress will come, but you will be able to manage it in a way that supports your goals, your well being, and your sanity. For me, that's what it means to be living, loving, and leading stress free.